keynote address on scaling AI in banking. Well, the artificial intelligence and data analytics have risen and played an important role in the new banking era. As per the reports, Indonesian banks are expected to triple the use of data, big data, and AI and ML by 2025 to improve customer experiences. While we're looking at 2021 trends covering Indonesia's BFSI space, potential AI challenges, why the persona-based toolings in banks won't work, and how democratization can make it better, and how AI transformation can take place, and what are the various applications that can be made. Well, ladies and gentlemen, joining us for this keynote is Alex Hubert, the RVP Sales Engineering Dataiku APAC. While Alex is the Regional Vice President from Dataiku based in Singapore, he's somebody who's heading the data science team for the first 3 years in the European region, and now he's the RVP of the Solution Engineering team for the APAC region from the beginning of 2019. I'd request the audience to please share the questions if they have any in the Q&A tab. With this, I'd now like to bring on the stage and screen Alex to join us for that. Requesting Alex to join us. Over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today. It's a real pleasure. I hope that everyone can see my screen, and I'm pretty sure that everyone can see my screen. So I'm going to be talking today about how what is needed to really scale AI in the banking world from a Dataiku perspective. So we have quite a fair amount of expertise in the BFSI market worldwide, even in APAC now. And that's going to be mainly a sharing session about our perspective on the topic. Thank you once again for the introduction. I've been working at Dataiku for about 6 years now, when we were a very young company founded in France, as you can guess from my accent, and now targeting the biggest enterprise wherever they are on the planet. And it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to be in the APAC region now since last year, and talking to the Jakarta World for the AI event. So first of all, a little bit about us, Dataiku, and why are we relevant. So first of all, we have major customers across industries, and we've been recognized as leaders recently in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and same in Forrester. We have an approach of technology, of AI that is really gathered around collaboration, making sure that everyone can collaborate around technology to build better analytics initiative. And we solve a wide range of problems that goes across industries, but probably particularly in the banking world. The fact that it takes a very long time to ideate a project and ultimately deploy it into production. The fact that there are a lot more technologies that are needed to be integrated to serve the new customer needs, whether you decide to have an on-prem strategy, a cloud strategy, an hybrid cloud strategy. How do you bring all the legacy assets that are sitting in the bank and leverage them to make sure that you can serve the customers better? Those are the kind of problems that banks, wherever they are on the planet, are facing right now. And as an introduction, Indonesian banks, to a certain extent, are not any different. And also, they have ahead of them a very interesting challenge. As we said, they're expected to triple the use of big data and AI by 2025 to improve the customer experience. And overall, that's a trend that we see in the digital banking world in APAC, where it's expected that 63% of the customer base at some point is going to turn itself towards neobank because they are more fluid, because they are more agile, because they answer their needs better. And that, for sure, it's a huge challenge for Indonesian banks to make sure that they can keep up with the competition. Especially because that report by IDC and Backbase that I'm sitting right now found that about 40% of the Indonesian bankable customers will go through direct onboarding of KYC or third party onboarding, and that's also allied that tier 1 and tier 2 Indonesian banks will operate within a different lifestyle and AI ecosystem by 2025. And that's overall getting into the trends that we see at a national level, because I think there is a broader national initiative regarding AI. And there was a very interesting article that was saying that about within the next 10 years, about 366 billion US dollar of the Indonesian GDP should be coming from the implementation of AI. So all of that is definitely transforming the industry. It's transforming the market needs, the customer needs. And the real question is, how do we change from a banking standpoint to make sure that we can cope with those change, cope with the competition, and stay relevant to the customer base. Those trends are trends that we see worldwide in the banking world, and obviously the Indonesian market is not any different. The first and foremost big trend is overall an acceleration towards from on-prem towards the cloud, and obviously where the regulation allows it. Not all the data can be shared that easily. Not all the data can be sent into the cloud that quickly. So you have a lot of services that appeared in terms of tokenization, anonymization. But that transition towards the cloud is also very needed to serve the customer better, because those use cases, those AI-driven use cases, are extremely greedy in terms of compute power, in terms of data, and we need the power of the cloud for the elasticity of the compute, and the fact that the compute in the cloud is first and foremost probably cheaper. And then there is a second big trend. There is a second big trend around in the market right now, which is all the governance around AI within the organization. Now that the organization is the usage of data has grown, we need to know who has built what with which data. That increase the need for validation team. That increase the needs for new measure of risk potentially on the financial markets, that increase the needs for new KPI as to how do we measure customer satisfaction, that increase the needs of how do we validate that the use of AI right now for a lot of use cases around KYC is in line with the regulation expectation. And overall, that creates all those new validation teams that are going to validate how AI is being used internally within the banking world to serve the customer better, to serve the banking use cases better, and overall reap up the benefit of AI. There is one last big trend right now, and once again, it's not purely for banks. It's overall in the market now that data science is maturing, that people are understanding a little bit better. People realize that a good AI project is a project that is deployed into production, that is being used widely across the organization, and that can truly help to transform the business, serve the customer, and understand the customer better. So you have all that trends around MLOps to make sure that, once again, a machine learning model is not a machine learning model living on a Jupyter notebook on one laptop, but that is going to be deployed on a targeted infrastructure, robustly built to support operationalization of those use cases. And the use cases are quite wide. You obviously have new use cases that have appeared because the number of data has increased significantly. Anything that is related to sentiment analysis through the analysis of chatbot logs, understanding what the customers are saying, requesting, that's definitely the newest type of use cases. But all the traditional use cases from banking are also touched by AI. The traditional financial sector is probably touched by what people would call Automation more than AI, same. Now that hype around AI is maturing, people makes the difference between automation and actual artificial intelligence. You have all that compliance use cases, financial crime use cases that are really touched by automation, to a certain extent AI, and that helps the banking world and the bank organization to be more agile and more in line also with the regulator expectation. But it's not only this. It's also the most advanced use cases as well, or at least the most customer-facing use cases as well. How do I make sure that I have the best machine learning model to decide whether or not I'm going to grant a loan to an organization, to decide if I'm going to grant a loan or not to an individual, all those kind of very important use cases that now needs to be embarked on a mobile phone, even less, I mean, on the website and a mobile phone, because that's what people are using on a day-to-day basis. The implementation of these challenges doesn't go without challenges. There was a very nice piece of research done by EY a couple of years ago that explained pretty well that the kind of challenges right now that stops the implementation of AI within the banking world lays between multiple categories, and it's the usual suspect really. First of all, the quality of data, the access to data. It's still pretty complicated to bring the right data sets to the right people within the organization to implement those use cases. The access to talent is also a problem. Attracting data scientists on banking use cases is not always that easy when banks are competing with fintech, obviously, but also other organizations that are offering nice data sets and nice use cases to work with. And when you're a young grad, you can be more tempted to work with those cooler startups than just traditional BFSI players. So access to talent is definitely a problem. How do we make sure that we find the right people within the organization that understand the business, that we know are going to be in the business for the next few years, that are going to leverage the right technology and the right data to ultimately help to reshape the bank of tomorrow. And then once again, a traditional hurdle in terms of AI adoption, the technological maturity. This one is very it's very easy to understand, but it goes a little bit deeper if we take the time to think about it. 10 years ago, when I started my journey in analytics, it was all about Hadoop. It was all about scalability of systems. 10 years later, some people are still trying to implement some Hadoop clusters. Everything is going into the cloud to leverage elastic computing. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that technological maturity is a problem, but it became also a problem because the technology is evolving so fast that it's becoming pretty complicated for a banking organization to be able to keep up with it. It takes time to define the right strategy. It takes time to implement the right technology internally. It takes time to identify all those people. And overall, when we think about it, that's probably the biggest blocker in terms of AI adoption. There are so many things to do when we think about implementing an AI use case, from data collection, data verification, feature extraction, actually writing the ML code, and then packaging all that and making sure that it's going to be deployed into production. When I'm just looking at it that way, I didn't even talk about the numerous number of people and meetings that are going to be involved throughout that journey. This is taking a huge amount of time, and unfortunately, it's a time that organizations don't necessarily have. And if they had it, well, obviously things would be much simpler, but they don't have it. And that's mainly the reason why we see a lot of failure when we talk about deployment into production, because you have a tremendous number of tools and people that are looking at the pipeline and that are looking at the AI journey from a different angle. They don't have a common framework, a common understanding, And ultimately, when something arrives close to production, you have 3 or 4 different people with 3 or 4 different tools, whether we're talking about a Jupyter notebook, some R notebooks, a little bit of Excel, a dedicated AutoML platform. When this is being brought to an engineer in charge of deploying that into production, it's a nightmare for them to repackage all of that and try to put it into production. It takes much more time, it's slower, and ultimately it leads much more often to failure. Our approach is very different. We're trying to have one single common framework that people from the business to the business analyst, to the data scientist, to the data engineer are going to collaborate around to make sure that the right data are being curated by the right business analysts that really understand the business well, and that are going to leverage the skills of the newest, the coolest data scientists in terms of AI, deep learning framework, making sure that they can also validate the value of what they're building. It doesn't stay a project siloed on a laptop, difficult to monitor, difficult to govern. Making sure that all of that is also following the right governance and security framework within the bank, and to make sure that everything stays in line with the regulation expectations. And overall, what we see with our approach is that the level of governance within the AI maturity and the AI journey is increasing a lot. Once again, because we're removing a lot of silos between people, technology, and processes. The access to compute is probably even more accessible with that integrated framework that acts as an abstraction layer on top of the infrastructure strategy that has been designed by the bank, and the deployment protocol, the access to data sources is overall pretty much and pretty well accelerated. If I had to give some key takeaways about my presentation, and if I have time, I can take a couple of questions. It's very important to, people used to say 10 years ago, fail fast, but it's not only failing fast, it's also learning and taking the right learning from those different experimentation. It's very important to focus first and foremost on the easy use cases, to implement them right, to learn the lessons from the implementation of those use cases, to then go forward and move forward to tackle more and more advanced use cases, more and more complex use cases. Having a centralized approach more than anything is going to simplify and accelerate overall the move towards the enterprise, the intelligent enterprise, the enterprise that move and breathe through AI. And finally, banks needs to realize that time is probably the most critical asset that they need to manage. If they are being so well disrupted by fintech, it's because fintech are moving much faster, and banks over the world right now start to ask themselves the right question: why does it take so long for us to implement a use case? We don't have an unlimited amount of time. How do we make sure that we can compress the time to become the intelligent enterprise of tomorrow? That's it for my presentation. Thank you very much once again for having me today, and hopefully I will talk to some of you soon throughout the day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us. And well, we do have a lot of your, the teammates being very active. And I'd request everyone who's joined us virtually from across the world today to kindly go and interact with the Dataiku team at the booth as well. So thank you once again, Alex, for giving us your valuable time and being at the World AI Show.